Hey, good morning, everybody. It's March 20th. Welcome to Studio Coffee. I'm here in my studio. I've got my coffee here and some notes. I do have some work that I've been making just off camera right now. I didn't really necessarily want to talk about the work exactly. I just wanted to try to unpack some of the thoughts I have been racing in my mind this week as we've been, quarantined for a full week now, or close to it. My mind has been racing all over the place. My emotions have been moving around a bit. Obviously, I think that a lot of you maybe can relate. And I had some thoughts based on some things that kind of came to me recently that I thought were really good, and they were beginning to coalesce and congeal into something that was starting to speak to me personally. So I'm just going to share that with you. As I do that too, I also recognize that these thoughts are probably not going to be shared, well, certainly not going to be shared by everybody. And many of you are in different places than I am, and different places in your careers and in your life and all that sort of thing, not just location, obviously. But I know that some of this is not going to be as helpful. So this is sort of like one of my former pastors used to say, this would be a little bit like eating fish. You eat the meat and spit out the bones. So if this is more bony than meaty, it's okay. Anyway, I have been thinking a lot about this season and what it might mean for me personally. For the first part of this, I've been really, like many people, thinking about how I can be productive through this, how I can use this time as a way to explore new things, or to get to projects that are kind of old projects that I've just never gotten around to. And I've been sort of thinking like, oh, I know how I'm going to do this quarantine. I'm going to use this time to do all the things that I've sort of been wanting to do. Now that's not too surprising for me, because I recognize that a lot of the ways that I define myself is through activity, what activities I'm doing. So not doing an activity for me is rather painful. So anyway, I've had to kind of reassess some of that a bit. The other thing I would say is that right now I'm in a season in which I have a lot of orders, wholesale orders to fill. So I have my list of things that I need to make, and I've just been going through the list. Actually, the list is right here. So in some ways, I've managed to not be too disrupted from my daily routines. Earlier this week, I realized that my attempt to just sort of blindly go through this period and just lean into that work is not going to be sustainable. It's not something that I should really do. One of the things that I thought about and it started to feel right was to cut my expectations of what I'm going to do in half. And that's a pretty substantial amount. Many people, my family is all at home right now, and they are also trying to do school and work from home. And for me to just sit here in this studio all the time is not going to be helpful to them. So I need to kind of participate in what our home life is going to be for a while. So that means I'm not going to necessarily be able to just sit here and do this. So that was one point for me that I was sort of slowly working on me this week. Another thing that I've been thinking about is how much of my life is devoted towards what I would call consumer activities. even a bit painfully, even as I'm sort of creating this video to get ready to put onto social media, it, of course, this week has really made me more aware of my social media and internet use, because everybody's trying to use the internet now because of working from home and school from home. So as you may have noticed, as I have noticed, my there's long lag times. When I try to do Instagram, it seems to work for about 5 minutes before things start to really slow down. And so it's sort of been a note to me that I probably have really gotten too comfortable in that place. And so I'm trying to find alternatives to that. So even though I'm doing this, I even would say I'm probably going to start moving Studio Coffee and any other videos that I'm going to do off of Instagram and probably onto YouTube, or at least available on my website. I probably will try to do less videos actually, and more writing as a way of connecting, because in part it just uses less bandwidth. So anyway, I'm thinking about that a lot. I would encourage any of you who are starting to feel the same way, is to start looking for alternatives to maybe doing a whole lot of social media. Along those lines, two things kind of passed my my inbox today. One, or not today, in the last few days. One was, here's three kind of things that sort of coalesced for me this week. So I've got them written down here. One was from, was actually something that was sent to me by a person who I don't know, named Emma Zek, who is, I found her on Instagram, so I was able to post the full posting of what she did onto my Instagram story, so you can see the rest of it there. But she's talking about, leaning into, I think, this particular moment. She says, in part, this: what if we become curious with this free time and had no agenda other than to experience being? What if you created art for the sake of creating? What if you allowed yourself to rest and cry and laugh and play and get curious about whatever arises in you? That, to me, was a bit convicting, because I was starting to feel like, although I'm creating art, I'm really creating in a very machine-like way right now, just because I happen to be filling orders. So there's not a lot of exploration just for the sake of curiosity. And I wanted to, I'm beginning to think about what that might mean for me to try to create work just for the sake of creating. Another thing that sort of struck me this week was I was reading an article, I think it was on ESPN, and in that article, a guy was sort of talking about, of course, the national sports are gone away, and when can they start back up? There was sort of a discussion about that. And the writer said, and I think this is a direct quote, he said, people need to be entertained. And when I read that, immediately I thought, wow, that is really terrifying. It's in some ways, I think, true, but I would say also very untrue. I don't think through the history of the world, I would say that people have needed to be entertained. I think that's a bit of a statement about this time and this generation and what we do, and the way that we consume. We tend to have fallen into the trap that the markets particularly want us to be a part of, which is that we have become largely consumers. When I go home these days, it's a lot of Netflix or other streaming services, and I've been a little bit feeling like that's really a bad idea. That we this sort of need to be entertained, and this sort of constant consumerism that is a part of entertainment. So I'm trying to think for myself, what ways can I be productive, a producer instead of a consumer? Now, to that end, too, I also, thinking both about Emma Zek, and then I also got another email from another creator named Andrew Simone. And part of he wrote a thing out to sort of encourage artists, and he was sort of saying, you know, this is a great time for artists. Our time is now to step into this time of what he called crisis. And he sort of, in encouraging artists, he said, we are connectors, conveners, community builders. We understand rhythm, flow, and negative space. Not everything needs to be doing. Silence is a way of telling. Stillness is movement. And that definitely has been resonating with me a bit. I think one of the things that I'm beginning to realize is that maybe it's more helpful for me to think about this as a time in which I need to be more contemplative. How can I lean into contemplative practices, and what might that also mean for me? What if my doing is not necessarily about doing, making, but that being silent or being still or observing a rainfall is a way of doing that is about being, being in the present, being in the moment, learning how to enjoy the moment, learning how to not have to be entertained in every moment. And so to that end, actually, there's many resources out there about that. There's many spiritual and religious resources for that. I'm in the Christian tradition, and I've been a huge fan of Thomas Merton for a long time. Thomas Merton wrote a book called New Seeds of Contemplation, which was pretty transformative for me. I haven't read it in maybe 8 years. I'm going to go back and start reading that again, and think a little bit more about some of the kind of contemplative practices that Merton is suggesting, and seeing if I can apply some of those. My artistic background includes a large study of the Japanese aesthetic of wabi-sabi, and I think a lot of that aesthetic is also related to sort of a contemplative and space-filled and silence-filled way of being. So I'm extrovert by nature, but I'm also a latchkey kid, and so I learned as from a young age how to spend a lot of time by myself, and so I need to maybe relearn how to do some of that stuff. So that's something I'm going to try to do. I'm going to continue to make videos. I may not make as many. I may try to do a little bit more writing, and I may try to post some writing. And I'll probably lean into my blog, and I'll change the link on my Instagram to link directly to the blog so that you can get to some more things there. I'm almost out of time, as much time as Instagram will give me, so I'm going to wrap up for now. But anyway, I hope you all are well. If you have questions or suggestions or anything, you can direct mail them to me, leave them in the comments. It has been really great to hear from so many of you who have been watching these videos, and I really appreciate that connection, and I want to be able to do things that are helpful for you, as well as any thoughts that you have for me that would be helpful. So stay well, stay safe, but don't be afraid to take risks either. Don't be afraid to lean into the silences. So, okay, that's it for me today. I'll see you later. Have a great weekend.